Hello, Susie. Susie,
Hi, Javier.
can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. I think that we are waiting for some guests to arrive.
Great. Let's.
Javier, it looks like we have um, at least 15 people on here, so which is great. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay, great. Great, great, great. Okay, very good. So we're going to get started. Thank you everyone for joining us. And it's a beautiful day outside, so that's always a great way to keep our momentum going, right? Javier, I want to welcome you and I want to tell everyone thank you for joining us. This is our second lunch and hour that we put on with the Chamber of Commerce. And for those of you who registered, everyone will receive 15% off their orders of $15 or more at the Schwack. But for the first, you will be receiving a free Schwack burger. So you should have received that coupon already. If you have any questions with that, you can email me and we will make sure you get that. So congratulations to you. And we want to thank the Schwack for partnering with us on this. And then we also want to welcome Javier Rivera-Carbone. He is a new member of the Chamber of Commerce. We're so delighted to have him. He is a labor and employment attorney and partner with Rivera-Carbone Professional Corporation, and he is going to talk to us today about getting back to work. And so we are so delighted to have you and we want to welcome you. Javier, also, I just wanted to introduce that he has been practicing in this field for over 25 years and he served formerly for a big attorney firm, and now he is serving more locally, but he's also a San Clemente resident. So we're so delighted to have you. And for the format today for our guests, we're going to start by Javier really is going to go through some general guidelines with us on the topics of risk management and the resilience roadmap, and then the 3 Ps as he calls them. And then we'll have some questions at the end. So please feel free to put your questions in the chat at the bottom. And I think that's about it. So without further ado, Javier, I'll give you the floor and you can start to kind of walk us through the first section, which I know you want to touch on the sensible approach to the risk management.
Well, thank you, Susie. Thank you, Arlene, and to the Chamber of Commerce. Let me begin by saying that if there is not enough time to take the questions in this webinar, I'll be happy to answer any follow-up questions within reason, because I know that it is important to get those questions out of the way, so I'll make myself available afterwards. I'm sorry. And also, I talk a lot, so Susie, please interrupt me and keep me on pace because it will be ideal to discuss all of the areas. So just jump in, interrupt me, and I'll change the subject. So let me just begin with the introduction, which I think it is important to put everything into perspective. What is happening now is that a health emergency has become an economic emergency. And we are at a stage where there is a conflict between continuing to be closed to preserve the health and opening to continue with the economy. And the reality is that one of the issues that's come up is whether employers, business owners, when they open, do they face a higher legal risk than before? And what I want to begin by saying is that not really. The risk is new, and most of us never dealt with this kind of risk, but the reality is that there is no new higher risk. It's just an issue of risk management. But the best way to manage a risk, I think, is to be aware of what the risk is. So if we make decisions being mindful of where the risk is at, then you're going to be able to navigate this crisis without having a legal claim. And the reality is that the employer in California has tremendous rights. The employer has the right to hire and fire, and California being an employment at will state, an employer can terminate an employee at any time for any reason, with or without a reason. That hasn't changed. It is just that the law says that a termination cannot be because of discrimination. It cannot be in retaliation for an employee exercising their rights, and it cannot be against the public policy of the state of California. So what we have to remember is that as long as whatever decision we make as business owners is not discrimination, it is not retaliation or punishment for somebody speaking up and defending their rights, and as long as the decision is not based on something that is against the public policy of California, there's not going to be an issue, there's not going to be a legal risk. So the first question is, what about liability for negligence, right? It is out in the news, in the newspapers, in the media, social media, that if an employer opens up their place of business and an employee or a customer gets infected with the virus, is the employer responsible and liable for that disease? And the answer is maybe, because if you fail to take precautions, if you fail to take guidance, then the argument could be made that you have been negligent, and for that reason, for your negligence, the person has been infected, and that's why they can bring a claim. But as long as you follow guidance from the government authorities, as long as you are mindful of the public policy of California, you should not have a claim for negligence, and those are going to be handled rather quickly. The second area of concern from the legal point of view is the health and safety requirements, because employers in California are obligated to provide a healthy and safe work environment. That's not new. It's been there forever. So this business of providing a safe environment is nothing new. It's just that now, because there is a known risk, which is the virus, there are steps that can be taken to minimize the impact of that risk. But as long as the steps are taken and the guidelines are followed, again, no claims should come. Discrimination. The law against discrimination is not new. It's been in the books forever. So what we have to be mindful is that when we make decisions related to reopening, they cannot be based on one of the protected categories or one of the protected classes against discrimination. Finally, there may be issues with the workers' compensation. And in the case of workers' compensation, I have to say that last week, the governor made the decision to issue an order under which if a person gets infected and that person works, it is now presumed that the infection happened at work. What does that mean? If it is now presumed that an infection happened at work, the consequence of that is that most people are now going to have access to the workers' compensation system, and they're going to be able to receive medical treatment and benefits from workers' comp because it is presumed that the infection happened at work. Well, that is good because anybody that goes into the workers' comp system cannot file a lawsuit for negligence. Now, the counter argument is that that decision and order is bad because now the workers' comp premiums are going to go up next year. Yes, so it's a trade-off between those two, but it's important that you are aware that the workers' compensation now has a presumption of infection in the workplace. And lastly, and to finish this idea of the risk management, the last area that we have to be mindful is the wage and hour area, that employees are paid their wages, that they're paid for all the time that they work. And there are special issues with people who earn a salary. For example, salaried employees who are paid to do tasks that are non-manual, typically. If now they start doing tasks that are manual, that are not directing or not exercising discretion, they may lose their exempt status, and also the pay levels and the compensation, if it is based on bonus or some other formula. We have to be mindful that there are some wage and hour issues and people have to be paid according to the labor code. So we have a few recommendations. The first recommendation that I have for everybody is to designate a master of the virus. What does that mean? There should be in each organization, however small, a person that is constantly looking at the guidance issued by the state, the local government, and the federal government, because it seems like every single day there's something new. For example, on Thursday, the governor's office issued a guidance for retail, which specifically said that retail was only allowed to do curbside sales. Now, yesterday afternoon, they issued a new guidance, which contemplates people coming into stores. Well, although coming into stores is not yet allowed, the state is already telling us the steps that need to be taken in order to do that. So somebody has to be the master and the keeper of the information, looking at this constantly. It's pretty straightforward. The state has a fantastic website. It's pretty easy to look at. It's in the roadmap, but somebody has to be paying attention. And lastly, the checklist, which is something that we prepared. The checklist can be used as a guide to go page by page and consider and checking those boxes on the considerations that need to be taken when reopening. And this checklist has, on a digital version, many links to the websites from the governmental agencies that are updated on a daily basis. Now,
okay, so sorry to interrupt, Javier, but I just want to make our guests aware that we will again send those materials out to everyone after this is over. So if you don't have those in front of you, not to worry, we'll send you the links and the checklist that Javier provided. So there you go, please continue.
Oh, thank you. And so this is the perfect time to then switch to phase 2 of the resilience roadmap. The state of California is calling it the resilience roadmap. It is essentially the steps and phases that need to be taken to go back to normal. And it's essentially a multi-step process. We are right now in what the government has called stage 2. And I would like to share with you an image that was published by the Orange County Health Agency. What is happening is that the state has a roadmap which considers certain steps and some metrics. These are scientific metrics need to be met in order to continue reopening businesses that are considered of different risk. The county of Orange is with 54 other counties, which means that they're only allowed to operate low risk businesses. As I understand it, there's a couple of counties that have been authorized to take it to the next level within phase 2. But the reason why I bring this up is because this resilience roadmap from the OC Healthcare Agency is telling us right there that there are some early stage businesses that are allowed to operate, but there is a list of businesses that are not allowed to operate yet, but they will soon, and that's on the green area of this picture. And clearly the county is telling us the businesses that are not allowed to operate at this stage. My suggestion, look at yourself and look at where you fit on the list. For example, from Friday to today, the governor added offices and office spaces as spaces that can open with low risk during stage 2 of the statewide order. So every day, more businesses are going to be allowed and included on this list. But the reason why I bring this up is because the county is telling us who they think could operate. And the bottom line is a question that I believe it was relayed this morning. The question is, if I am not on the list, can I open? What happens if I open my business and begin operating when I don't find myself on the list? And the answer is, well, when we look at the risk, the truth is that if a business is not on the list, the argument can be made that that business is operating without authorization from the government and should be liable for acting outside of the scope of what the government is telling us, because this is the public policy right now. So my suggestion is open, following the guidelines, and if you do, with common sense, you're not going to have any claim. You're not going to have any troubles. But what is important about this resilience roadmap, I think, is that the state government has issued some very specific and detailed checklists. So for each industry, for example, in the case of retail, they issued the general guidance, which has multiple pages, but they have also issued a checklist which you can follow. And if you follow the checklist, you should be okay because you're in compliance with the guides. But I want to take some time to discuss what is required, because the first requirement is to do a risk assessment. What does that mean? To look around and to see areas of exposures. And we know that exposures comes from the sharing of air that is contaminated, of touching of surfaces that may be contaminated, and anything that brings people close together. So we can look around and take measures to prevent those three risks. The second is to create a written plan. And a written plan that has to have certain things in it. For example, it says, who's going to be responsible for implementing the plan? I suggest it be the business owner. The plan in writing has to say what measures have been taken. I suggest something very straightforward. Just list the measures that were taken. For example, if we are going to require face coverings from employees, it should be on the list. If we're going to encourage visitors to wear face coverings, it should be on the list. Are we going to mandate for people to use face coverings when they enter the buildings? And all of the measures taken to prevent the spread of the virus, and just follow the checklist and do a written plan to prevent the spread of the virus. You can do it yourself, or you can call your friendly neighborhood employment lawyer. In San Clemente, we have a couple of excellent friendly neighborhood employment lawyers, and they can definitely help you out to craft this plan and put it in writing and put it together. But once you have that, with the measures taken to ensure that there is a low risk of people getting contaminated, you'll be in a good space because you can follow that plan and share it with your employees so the employees are aware of the measures that you're taking. For example, an adaptation to keep social distancing is something that I think we all have seen, is like tape, which is a visual cue on the ground. So if we're going to have visual cues to help people keep social distancing, if we're going to put plexiglass, for example, if we're going to put some other type of adaptation to prevent the spread of the virus, that should be on the list. And on the guidelines, for example, for restaurants, now it is recommended by the state for them to remove condiments from the table. So no more ketchup, no more salt, no more pepper on the table, I guess. Some of the suggestions are like to eliminate shared baskets of bread. I mean, things like that, which are adaptations to prevent the spread of the virus. But if you follow the checklist for your industry and you have a straightforward, simple plan in writing, the last one I did is 2 pages long, so it doesn't have to be a book, you'll be in a good place to be able to check the box and comply with the requirements from the county, from the state, and all of these in California are above and beyond what the United States government, federal government is requiring. So you'll be in a good place.
Okay, so Javier, just to clarify, you're suggesting that there is a master, or rather a coordinator, for each business to keep track of the details as they evolve, correct? And would that be, for example, it could be an owner or it could be an operator of a business, whomever the person?
Yes, yes. It is just that it is important to designate a person who's going to be responsible for being up to date. The business owner usually is the best person because the business owner will have to make the decisions anyway. But it doesn't have to be. I know that business owners have a million things to think about, and this is just one more. So it definitely can be delegated, but whomever the person is designated to be up to date, and whomever the person is designated to implement the plan that is in writing, that person has a new job, which is to be the master of this virus. And it's not hard because the state has many resources and a daily updated website. So it is essentially somebody that is going to go every morning and look at what's going on and relay the information to the business owners, because some things are going to change slowly, but some things are going to change dramatically. For example, when are restaurants going to be allowed to have people dining in? Well, we have the guide. So if you ask me, it's going to happen next week. but that's just a guess. So what is important is to be mindful of that there's new information, but we're going to have enough time to be ready because the government is issuing these guidelines before things are actually allowed. So that's the master of the virus, what I call.
Okay, very good. So, and then I just want to plug your friendly neighborhood Chamber of Commerce also, that we do receive updates daily from the legislators, the state, all the VIPs, and Arlen and I and Joey from our team, we're working very diligently to funnel all that into little bits of information that you as members can take in, and so that it becomes easy to access for you and to funnel with everything else you have going. So if you have any questions on resources, you can please reach out to us. And if you're not receiving our emails, to please let us know.
That's right. The Chamber does a good job of giving a link to the actual document. So it is just saying, okay, from now on, you're going to read the daily email from the Chamber and tell me what's new so we can modify the plan if necessary.
Great. Okay, very good. So we are into the next section of your guidelines here, right?
That's right.
Flow.
So let's talk about what I call the 3 Ps, the PPP, but please, this is not about the money. It's just that you don't forget that one of the Ps I call planning. And the planning P is just that. Who are we going to bring back? Because the reality is that most businesses are not going to be able to open 100% at 100% capacity. So if we are going to have a reduced staff, if we're going to do what we're going to do with less people, the question is who is coming back? And in making the decision of who's coming back, we have to be mindful of a couple of things. The first is that, like I said, the reason for bringing somebody back cannot be discriminatory, right? But I'm also telling you that the government is saying that people who have an underlying medical condition that is chronic, or people who are over age 65 are at a higher risk for infection. So we have to take measures to protect the people who are older, and we have to take measures to protect the people who have a chronic medical condition. So when we decide who to bring back, for example, there was an employer who said, I am not going to allow anybody who's over age 65 to come back to work. Can you do that? And the answer is like, wait a minute, it seems like age discrimination. Because I know some 65-year-old people who are running marathons, and I know some 65-year-old people who are in a wheelchair. So it really doesn't necessarily mean that age is the deciding factor. So you have to be careful that whomever you decide to bring back, you should have a business reason for bringing that person back. Some companies are doing it by seniority. The people who have been there the longest, they should come back first. And some people do it by productivity and efficiency. Well, what does that mean? Just be mindful that there is a risk for discrimination on who you bring back. Also, there are some people who are concerned. Let me just say that. I was going to say afraid, but there are some people who are concerned of being infected if they go back to work. And some employees have said straight up, they're not going to come back. So if I have an employee that doesn't want to come back because they're afraid of getting infected, what should I do as a business owner? And that's a sticky one, because the reality is that when we look at the law, we can terminate anybody for any reason, right? So if somebody says, hey, I'm offering you a job, you don't want it, you're fired, that's definitely something that is possible. But I also have to say that there is a law that says that employees can refuse to work in an unsafe environment if there is a direct threat to their health and safety. Let me say that again. If there is a direct threat to their health and safety, the employees can refuse to come back to work, and that's protected by law. Also, if an employee has a medical condition or a disability, they also have the right to be accommodated, and a reasonable accommodation should be provided if a reasonable accommodation is possible, and more time or time off is or could be a reasonable accommodation. So what do we do? If an employee says that they don't want to come back, well, my suggestion is that you engage in a dialogue and that you try to be as flexible as possible, because the reality is that at first, not everybody will fit to come back. But if you need to bring somebody and you need to have the position available, my suggestion is to document the conversation by sending them a letter telling them that we asked them to come back, that they have concerns about coming back, that they have decided not to come back, but more importantly, to document in that letter the adaptations and the measures taken by the employer to minimize the risk of infection. Because if we document in writing the reasons, the adaptations taken to minimize the risk of the virus, then there is no direct threat if we follow the government guidelines, and then the employee cannot refuse to come back. But just to be safe and just to be flexible, what I would do is to tell the employee that we are going to consider that person to be on an extended furlough or to continue on furlough status, but if and when they decide to come back to work, the position may not be available. Because if and when they decide to come back to work, if we have a job for them, they're welcome to come back. But if and when they decide to come back to work, we hire someone else, we're so sorry, but the businesses must continue and some people are just not gonna come back. And that's okay, because we're balancing the interest of the employer to continue operations and the interest of the employees to safeguard their safety, because this is all surrounded by the measures and adaptations that business owners are gonna follow through the multiple checklists.
Okay,
and
excellent. Excellent.
Now, one point that I think is important on that part of the checklist, and this is all on the checklist, but one point that I want to highlight is the accommodation of people who have a higher risk for severe illness. So people who are at a higher risk, maybe they need some accommodations, and some accommodations that are suggested by the Department of Fair Employment and Housing in California, by the EEOC in Washington, is essentially to either do schedules which are shorter, or stagger people, or find a way for people to telework. That's not possible in most cases, but to accommodate the employee with a higher risk, which are older or with an underlying medical condition, to find a way to keep them employed, if possible, as an accommodation for the disease. But there has to be an interactive process. This is just not willy-nilly the employee saying, I demand this. No, there has to be a conversation, and some medical evidence may be necessary in order to provide an accommodation for a medical condition or for a disability, but be mindful that that may be necessary in some cases for people who are at higher risk of contracting this virus. Now, I suggest that we move to the next P, because like I said, I can keep going all day and keep you here, but we have the lunch time, the meal period. So let's now talk about the second P, which I call preparing, which to me means getting the workplace ready and safe, the workplace safety. And in your checklist, you're gonna see the guidelines that have been published by Cal OSHA. And what is important about the California OSHA guides is that there is a guide for general businesses, which is what most businesses should do. And there is a guide for businesses that are affected by the possibility of the virus being passed through the exchange of air. So if there is an airborne risk, there is a stricter guidance. What does that mean? Well, that is essentially mean businesses where people have to be very close physically. Doctors, right? Something that has to do with taking care of the person, like massages and anything that has to relate to beauty. That's why those businesses are still closed, because people have to get close. It'll be, well, maybe you can give me a haircut 6 feet apart, but it'll be very, very hard to do something like that, right? So for those businesses, they have to take additional precautions, and there's a little bit of a different checklist, but for most employers, they just have to follow the Cal OSHA guidelines. The CDC has some very good instructions on when to clean, how to clean. The EPA has a list of disinfectants. They even tell you things like that you have to keep it for at least 20 seconds to a minute. You know, for the longest time, I thought just wiping it was enough, but it seems like the EPA is telling us you have to leave it for the virus to die and then wipe it. I'm like, oh, so there's a lot of guidance. It's all in the government's website. It's pretty easy to find. And finally, we have the resilience roadmap created by the state, which has links, and they all cross-link to each other. So just pick your favorite, follow it, and you are not gonna have an issue preparing the workplace. But there are things that can be done to avoid the people getting infected. For example, I know of a business that just installed a machine that will open the door. It has a sensor, one of those things that opens the door and closes the door. Well, that eliminates people touching the door. I know of another business that is implementing a filter. Now, this is a medical office, but now they have a hospital grade filter. Some people are talking about using light to disinfect. Anything that you can use to increase and better your disinfection and your cleaning process is welcome. And there's some guidelines on them, because at the end of the day, this is all about disease prevention. And one component that is really important is to educate or give information to employees. For example, some posters and some folders and flyers that allow people to have more information about the importance of washing their hands, the importance of wearing face coverings, the importance, and this is huge, of keeping physical distancing, and all of the things that are going to help prevent the virus from the perspective of the employer when they're welcoming employees or the public. And lastly, I would like to talk about the third P, which I call protecting, because I want to leave some time for questions. Hopefully, we're going to have some time for that. But under the P of protection or protecting the employee rights, I want to talk about the health and safety concerns that we already identified before. And like I said, nothing new. It's just that we have to take reasonable steps to prevent the infection at the workplace. As long as you take reasonable steps to prevent the infection, you're going to comply with your obligation of providing a safe working environment under the circumstances. But there's also the issue of privacy. Employees have the right to privacy, and that includes their medical information. What does that mean? Well, there are things that are not going to be a problem at all, but there are things that may be a problem. For example, if we are going to take an adaptation of measuring temperature, right? So if we have decided that we're gonna now measure people's temperature when they come in and when they walk in the door, and they put one of those machines in your forehead, what if I have an elevated temperature of 100.4, right? The employee has the right for that information to be kept private. So one recommendation is for the employer to document the temperature reading, but not say it out loud. And if somebody is above and beyond, the 100.4 temperature fever, then how do we handle that? Are we going to say to the person, hey, go back home, you have a fever, or we have to handle that confidentially? And the recommendation is that we handle that confidentially because it is medical information. Also, you don't have to take temperature. The guidelines say that either you take the temperature or you ask a questionnaire. And a questionnaire is just, a couple of questions, like 5 questions. And those questionnaires, are we going to keep them? And if we are, we're going to keep them in a safe place that is private. If we're not going to keep them, great. But, the handling of the questionnaires is important to protect the privacy of the employees, that they have a right to privacy concerning their medical information. Wage and hour, being paid. When somebody walks up the door, however long it takes to measure the temperature, that time is compensable. And some people say, hey, that's nothing. Well, it may be nothing in a small place, but in a factory with 1,000 workers, it's going to take a while, right? So the reality is that be mindful that any time that employees are taking to get in, prepare their workstations, and before they leave to clean and disinfect, all of that is compensable, so they have to be paid to the absolute last minute. Also, there are concerns that if somebody shows up to work and they are sent home because they have symptoms or because they have a higher elevated temperature, well, the wage orders say that those people have to be paid show-up pay, which in most cases is 2 hours of pay. So if somebody shows up and they're sent home because they cannot work, more likely than not, we will have to pay the show-up pay of 2 hours of pay just because they showed up and were unable to work. From the wage and hour perspective, it is also very important to be mindful that people still have the right to take rest breaks, to enjoy unpaid meal breaks, whether they are at the physical location or if they're teleworking, we have to ensure that they have rest breaks and meal breaks available, which takes me to the issue of overtime. In the case of overtime, the concern is that some people are now working more than before, especially those working from home. Well, we have to find measures to ensure that people only work 8 hours and that overtime is compensated for those employees that are hourly. And for those employees that are going to physically be at the site, then we also have to be mindful, like always, that all hours are paid, that there is a record of the hours worked, and that we are not in violation of any of the wage and hour requirements, which admittedly, in California, we have many more than anywhere else in the country. And finally, the last point on the employee rights that I think is important to highlight, and again, this is all on the checklist, but I want to highlight that there are some special consideration to be given to people who have a medical condition that is chronic or who are older, because they need to be accommodated if necessary. And in those cases, it is important to have an interactive process and conversation, which should not be a difficult conversation, about protecting those employees, especially because the government is telling us that we have to protect them specially, but the law says that they have the same right to work. So those clash, and we have to find a balance to be mindful of the discrimination concerns when bringing people back and going back to work and going back to business. So that's my short version of the 3 Ps, the checklist and the legal concerns. Susie, I suggest that we take any questions because, you know, we have a few minutes, right?
Right. We want to be mindful of everyone's time. I know we're running a little bit over, but as you can all see, Javier is just bursting with wonderful information. And again, I just want to assure everyone that we'll be providing you those resources. So not to worry. And it can feel very just generally kind of overwhelming for people, Javier, but I think that what you're demonstrating is that if people have kind of a common sense approach to everything, and they show diligence and organization, that things are going to be okay. And then obviously, just like anything else, they need to ask questions when those come up. So obviously that's what we're all here for, and that's why we're providing this today with Javier. So with that said, right now we don't have any questions in the chat yet, but please, if you're a guest, feel free to submit those. And then I just want to circle back again, Javier, to the question that was submitted prior with regards to retail and opening. And I just want to clarify that your recommendation is to go to the guidelines, and then those folks will be ready and prepared when they're quote unquote authorized to open. Am I understanding that correctly?
You are. So
okay.
I have 2 responses. The first response is that I said a lot, and there is a lot of information because governments do what governments do. They make something simple terribly complicated. So it can feel overwhelming to have all of these rules and the soup of agencies, you know, the EDD, the CDC, and, you know, we can go down the list and we are going to need a roadmap just to know who's who. But the bottom line is that all of those rules are there to protect everybody, right? But at the end of the day, if people forget everything that I said, just remember this. Every decision that you make, just be careful that it is not discrimination against somebody who's protected. Just make sure that whatever decision you make is not punishing somebody for speaking up or protecting themselves. And make sure that every decision that you make is not contrary to what the public policy of the state of California is, right? So if you remember, I'm not going to discriminate, I'm not going to retaliate, and I'm going to follow the public policy, you're going to be safe. And nobody's going to make a claim against you. And if they do, they're going to lose. So just sit, relax, right? And enjoy this flight. It's going to be bumpy, but it's just about being careful, right? So I think it's important to have that perspective that this is all about not discrimination, not retaliation, and following the public policy. And most people say, I do that anyway. Well, great, just keep doing that. Now, let's talk about the public policy. The public policy of the state of California is that only low-risk businesses can open this week. That's what they said. As of last Friday, only low-risk businesses can open. And some businesses have said, I don't care, we're going to open, watch me. Okay, can they do that? Sure. But the reality is that when you open ahead of schedule, somebody can point the finger at you and say that you are acting in violation of the public policy of California. And for that reason, you should be liable because you're not obeying the state, right? And that's why there's lawsuits. People who are filing lawsuits saying that the government doesn't have the authority to order what they order. But this is interesting. They're saying, government, you don't have the power, but we need a judge to make that decision, right? But if you don't let the judge make a decision and you make the decision yourself and you jump ahead and open before the county is allowing you to open, there is a legal risk. How big is it? I don't know. But my obligation as an officer of the court is to say, hey, you should follow what the county says, because the county has publicly stated that they're gonna follow the governor's mandates. And in the case of the county of Orange specifically, the information which is public, no secret, is that the county is making their own plan and they're using their own metrics, and they are asking Sacramento to authorize and bless what the county is proposing. And the end result may be that the Sacramento may approve what the county is proposing. And if that is the case, Orange County is gonna reopen before other counties. My prediction, Orange County is gonna open way before LA County and even Riverside County, if you look at the numbers. Okay. So why jump ahead if there is a risk when you can just slow down and follow the steps and be safer? That's all I'm saying, just be safe. But the reality is that some people are opening too early, and some people are actually not taking advantage of opening. There are some businesses that could have reopened already, but they haven't. So this is all a mixed bag.
Okay. Javier, we have a question. Oh.
I love questions.
Okay. And then after that question, we're going to close because we want to be respectful of everyone's lunch hours. This is from a great member who, if you haven't met him, you too will get along very well. I know Michael Snow. He said that the governor said that workers' comp will assume that the employer is at fault if an employee gets the virus. And then you mentioned that normal negligence law prevails. So the question is, what is the advice? If that can be answered shortly, if not, I can obviously connect you.
Yes, absolutely. So I think I'm going to give an answer for everybody, and I'll be happy to continue this conversation offline. And by the way, any other question that comes up, if somebody is afterwards thinking about it, I'll answer any question within reason, so just reach out. But let's talk about the workers' comp piece. The governor order, and this is an order from the governor, it's not a law, and it has an expiration, so this is not forever. So for a limited period of time, because the government said so, any person who gets infected in California, it is going to be presumed that that happened at work. The consequence of that is that any employee that says, I am sick, you send them to workers' comp, and the workers' comp system will take them in, give them medical treatment, and give them compensation. They're off your hands, and they're going to be handled by workers' comp and your workers' comp carrier. Some people say that's fantastic news for employers, because now all they have to do is say, hey, go to workers' comp, bye-bye, come back when you're good and ready. So some people say this is really, really good, because now it's going to be within a system that you already paid for. You already paid for workers' comp, so might as well use it. And here's the catch for the attorneys. If somebody goes to workers' comp, that is the exclusive remedy that the employee can get. So an employee that is in workers' comp cannot sue for negligence because they already have a remedy. So some people say this is really, really good, because not only it allows the employer not to the burden of dealing with a sick employee, workers' comp will take care of it. It is also good because now the employee cannot sue the employer. The other side of that coin is that by now saying that the infection happened at work, what is going to happen is that workers' comp premiums are going to go up naturally. So some employers are saying, oh my God, if it was expensive to operate before, it's going to be now more expensive than before. So both sides have a reason to argue for or against. It's just a question, which one is worse? to pay more premiums next year or to have to deal with losses now. And as an attorney, I can tell you, you don't want a lawsuit, but you also don't want a higher premium. So this is a tough one, leaving politics aside.
Very good. Okay, Javier, thank you for that answer. Because we're on time, we're going to close, but I want to also go back to thanking Javier. I also want to reiterate that he's available to answer questions within reason. We're going to put up a slide at the end here, and it's going to have some information on how to reach Javier if you have a question, but also we are excited to announce that we're going to launch the Back to Work University. And this is going to be something that is going to be wonderful for the members because they will have a chance to take a deeper dive into this information. And Javier has agreed to be our instructor. So if you would like to be on the wait list for that and receive information about Back to Work University, please email me, or you can email Arlen, or you can just email the chamber directly at info@schamber.com. And we'll be happy to put you on the list to be the first to receive information about Back to Work University. And this is really just set up so that you as business owners and operators can feel like you have a resource that will walk alongside you and you can come to work with confidence. And we know that it's a really, again, kind of scary time for people in a lot of ways, but it doesn't need to be that way. We can walk through it smartly. And so we're going to help you do that. So with that said, I want
if I may, just
yes.
15 seconds. The idea is to have and develop a folder. So you have a binder. And if somebody shows up from the government saying, what have you done? You should just give them the binder. So it's just a step-by-step approach on having the forms, having the flyers, having everything in one place. And the chamber came up with this idea, and I think it's a great idea. So yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. And we have all the resources here for you. So we're excited about it. And then again, we want to thank the Schwack Cantina for partnering with us on the Luncheon Hour. I hope you all enjoy your meals with them. They are really excited to be back open again for the takeout and delivery services. So, so thank you again to them. And thank you, Javier, for your time today. Your chamber is always here to help you. So we look forward to hearing from you all. And again, we will send those resources out to you shortly. Javier, thank you for everything.
Thank you.
Okay, and thanks to the wonderful members. Bye for now.